Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Sonia, and today I just thought we would have like a little discussion about romantasy, knowing a little bit more about the genre and reading a lot more about it, kind of my misconceptions of it and now how I feel about it. Reading it for a decent amount of time. Um, a quick disclaimer, obviously, I'm more of a fantasy reader than I am a romantasy or romance. I actually don't read, if any, romance, to be honest. I mostly just read romantasy, and then if I read something like in the fiction genre, it's mostly like a thriller or suspense, or just like a historical fiction. So it's not that I'm voided of romance, I'm just voided of romance as just like romance itself. Um so that's just my quick disclaimer. But anyway, I find romantasy kind of an interesting genre in the in the fantasy sphere because you can do a lot with it. And if you flip it over to fantasy romance, you know, yeah, it's probably a little bit more romance heavy than what we're typical in like a regular fantasy. But romance in fantasy, like epic couples, like that's been around for the ages. So when we're thinking about romantasy, like just coming into the talk, maybe within about 5 to 10 years, um, I still feel like it's very misunderstood as a genre. This is not a genre that's just for women. Like, men can enjoy it too. I think it has to be a perfect balance of the two. Like, you have to have your your world building. You have to still have like a really good fantasy system. You still have to have characters become way more important in a romantasy than I feel like even sometimes in fantasy, because that's what you're mostly focusing on. A lot of fantasy sometimes leans into more of like a plot heavy, not always a character heavy. Where I feel like after reading so much romantasy is the opposite. Like, the plot is there. Like, obviously, like Fourth Wing, for example, they are going to school because they do see a war coming and they're getting ready for that. So that's kind of the plot of Fourth Wing. It's been a while since I've read Fourth Wing, but that's kind of the plot of it. Where, like, I think people mention like certain aspects, but when you're talking about Fourth Wing, like, people are talking about the major couple. Um Zayden, and I can't remember her name right this exact second in time. But it kind of reminds me of like when we had like when urban fantasy was really really big. So I'm talking in supernatural romance. Like, I'm talking your Buffy, your Charmed, your even the Supernatural show. I'm trying to think. But like Vampire Diaries, like originals, like all of those were heavy romance. But the plot was so interesting and the lore was so interesting that if you weren't in it for the romance, it was okay because the lore was interesting. Like, the lore to Vampire Diaries is actually really, really interesting, and how the doppelgangers were made, and how the witches function, and the history of the originals, and the whole concept of how vampirism works and stuff is way different in the Vampire Diaries lore and stuff. And then we had Twilight. Twilight was very romance heavy, but there's still a little bit of lore to that. Not as much. I think what happened, because like I like to think of this as, okay, how did this start? And in my mind, I really go back to Anne Rice and how Anne Rice was starting to change the way vampires were written again. So we have Dracula as like the main thing. We probably have other stories, but Dracula is the main. When we're talking vampires, for example, we we can take from the original Dracula story. Now, Dracula, the story itself, is a romance. Like, he falls in love with a woman that either she just looks like his love from the past or she's a doppelganger. I don't think they really say that in Dracula, but that's kind of the whole main frame. Like, yes, he's a scary monster, but he also has the ability to love and everything. And then you have Anne Rice that goes even deeper into the psyche of the vampire and how immortality would affect you and your decision making. Um, and how you can incorporate that into the human and mankind, and how vampires can't really love humans like they, you know, like humans would probably like. Um, it's not until we get the Vampire Diaries and all this stuff where if Elena, little spoiler for Vampire Diaries, if Elena did not die and did not become a vampire, Stefan and Damon would still be obsessed with her. Like, and that's the whole thing. But you can see, like, towards the end, like, they have to be they have to be a vampire by the end because it doesn't work, or like there has to be some type of human aspect, like somebody has to turn back into a human or something, or like they end up having to be with a human. um so that's the whole thing on that. But what this can teach us about romance is, especially when we're talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I think about the toxic relationship. And I think Buffy does a really good job about talking about how toxic it can be to have like such a big age difference. A lot of people, when we're talking about the vampire story, um, and this is fairies, this is any type of immortal, they have this issue. Like, there's always going to be this separation between the couple because one has been alive for like 200-300 years. One's only been alive since she was 16-17 years old. And we get this like age gap discussion, which is a very important discussion to have without having to be 100% serious about it, without having to shove it in your face. Like, I think that is something that we as a community, we understand that there's aspects to it that can be wrong, that can be right, but this opens the discussion. Like, it's a lot easier to talk about like an age gap when it's like a fictional character like that. Now, I take it as like, how are they mentally? Like, are they a 17-year-old, looks like a 17-year-old, has a more like mentally 17-year-old? Because that is a lot different than having a guy that looks like he's 17, he's a vampire, so he's like thousands of years old, and he has the mentality of an adult. That's where like we can have like a really big a big power struggle. Um And that's where we can use romantasy to have that deeper discussion. Um, and another thing too is just the idea of, we can talk about the love triangle and all that stuff. To me, love triangles in real life, like, I don't really see that happening. Like, I think most people can pick somebody, and if they don't like the one person, like, they'll go to the other person. Like, it just doesn't seem like something that a lot of fiction talks about, but you're eventually going to have something I can't really stand, which is the one-sided love. So I talk, usually when I give this example, I talk about Naruto with the Sasuke, Sakura, and Naruto, where Naruto, mostly for the first part, loves Sakura, but Sakura loves Sasuke, and it's just the whole thing, all the love stories are based off of this one concept. Um, so there's that. But romantasy can also just be fun. And I think about what I read on a normal basis. It's pretty rough. Like, I read a lot about, fictional. Yeah, it's fictional, but I still read a lot about wars, tragedy, and political stuff. So it's a really rough read. And to go into a romantasy and just be like, I'm having a good time is fantastic. And I think that's a concept that I think we've lost for the longest time, is the ability to just have fun with reading. I think we've gotten to the point that we judge so much of what people are reading and not that they're just reading themselves. And romantasy, like, has opened the gate for a lot of people to come back into reading. The big discussion is like, when we're in school, we're forced to read very, I don't want to say dull, because there is some books that I read in school that are very interesting, that have stuck with me. But at the same time, these are classic books that at that point in my life I could not relate to. I can't relate to Jane Eyre, like, at all. Like, I think, like, she makes so many bad decisions that I personally wouldn't make, being, where I'm at right now. Even being at the age that I am and reading, like, Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, and all that stuff, like, I still can't relate, because that's not the expectation of me, Where with romantasy, urban fantasy, you're dealing with modern day issues for the most part. And I think it's very important to have stories, especially when you're a young adult, that you can relate to. Because if I didn't have books like Vampire Academy, even though, like, looking back at it, it's kind of cringe. I read the Margaretville Vampire series. I read Tith, which is the Holly Black. Like, she had a fairy series before she did her other fairy series. But if I didn't have these books to relate to, I think I would have found reading very dull and boring. And not, like, I don't think I would have gone further on to want to write my own book or anything like that. Like, reading Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, they're experiences, and I think they're good discussion talks about, like, women's struggles back then and how we can still kind of relate to its day. But when I think of relatability, especially in, like, the classic realm, I'm, like, thinking Handmaid's Tale, because it's like, it seems like it's so far away, but it was, like, written in the 80s. Um, so they're talking about things that I'm a little closer to. Now, was I born kind of more towards where the internet age? Yeah. But I still kind of remember dial up. Like YouTube wasn't always around. Like I still remember that age of like sometimes your only entertainment was books because like the internet would go out or somebody would be on the internet, so you would have to like maybe like listen to music or read a book or find some other way to entertain you. um I mean, I still had my PlayStation 2 and stuff, but sometimes like you just want to get off of a screen, and I feel that more now than I ever have in my life, because I feel like we went from like we went from most of the world, like world history, like the internet to me, when I think about it, is so new. Like this idea of screens and all this propaganda and all this stuff is so new, and that's kind of the thing that I look into when I look at romantasy, because they do go back to like medieval times, or like they're like worlds that are like before, like, I'm sorry, I'm using like way too much, guys. um Before the time of the internet, and to see that like brings my idea of fantasy back into the forefront. Urban fantasy is a little bit different because you do have like the most updated technology and stuff like that. But I also feel like we need that idea of fantasy back in our lives, because we're just bombarded with so much just real life chaos, where I love reading one of these romantasy books and being like, okay, I can go to this world for a little bit. There's serious topics that are mentioned in these too that I think a lot of people don't talk about. Like the Tamlin and Freya in Courts of Thorns and Roses, the second book. Like they went through a traumatic experience, but both of them are taking that traumatic experience in different ways. And trauma is something really hard to talk about, but when we can talk about, okay, like when we can take an example from something somebody loves and talk about it in such a way where, okay, what should Tamlin have done better? And in some ways, after I watched Sarah J. Maas talk about this, and like she was like, well, I don't want, like, people don't want him to be reformed. Like, I definitely agree, because that's not really what human nature is. Like, he can change. I feel like Tamlin could change to become a better person, but if he doesn't want to put the work in, he lost, as far as we know, like pretty much the love of his life. We could have another romance with Tamlin. I hardly doubt it. I don't think she's going to like put any other woman really in that character's shoes. Um Unless he really does reform, and I don't think she's going to do that. So, and then I think about Spike and like the trauma Buffy has to go through dealing with Spike and everything. There's a lot of trauma discussion in a lot of these romantasy, urban fantasy books and shows that I think get looked over because of what it is. Some of these books could be really good in a like marriage counseling discussion, cuz I would love some marriage counselors to go after that whole Tamlin thing. And okay, if I was a counselor, how would I, like, if and they were in my office, how would I handle it? And that's something that, knowing all the bits and bobs, which you don't normally do in counseling, like, can be a lot of good practice. And that's just the thing with these that, with these that a lot of people do not get is there is a discussion to be had. And I think skipping on that discussion is very, very absurd. Like, we fought so long to just prove that fantasy was a good genre, where I would think a lot of people in fantasy would just be like, oh, it's another genre. We give it the same respect that we do just regular fantasy. But I think the problem is, and I'm going to talk about like the TikTok discussion. Yes, these books are good, big on TikTok. And a lot of people, I feel like, still do not take TikTok seriously, and don't take TikTok books seriously. It's the books that TikTok picks is the problem. So you have, like, and there's some books that have gotten popular that I've liked. Like, even Sarah J. Maas was popular on TikTok at one time. And she's been big for years, but TikTok kind of brought her back. Red Rising's big on TikTok. Like, I think Poppy War is getting a comeback. Like, so there's some things that are making a comeback, but there's some stories that are just not really that great. Like Metal Slinger. Like, I tried to read Metal Slinger so much. It was badly written. And I think, and this is the funny thing that I think a lot of people don't think about is the editing process. And this is kind of romantasy, I think, doesn't do it for people, is editing. Editors do not seem like they take romantasy seriously either. So why, as a reader picking up this book, why should I take it seriously if your editing team's not going to take it seriously? And that's a problem. Like, I've been seeing a lot with a lot of books, and it's not just romantasy, it's not just sci-fi, it's not just fantasy. It's like everybody's getting hit with, oh, we can alpha edit and then put it out. Okay, cool. Things are hopefully spelled correctly. There's a comma where a comma's supposed to be. But you now have a 900-page book of nonsense. And this is not, like, in my opinion, an author's fault. You need beta and you need alpha. Because what beta does as an editing, if you don't know, I explain this usually every time I talk about this, is, sorry guys, beta readers take your book and they just read it for vibes. So if they're vibing, but let's say in chapter 5 Henry does something out of character, your beta reader is going to catch that. Or if there's too many smutty scenes, like, why is there that much when it's not necessary? Because, and the idea of romantasy and smut is, it's hand in hand, but I feel like as a writer, and if you love writing these scenes, like, you're gonna put more in there, right? Versus a romantasy that's like more about, oh, he touched my hand type of thing. Like there's a lot of different types of romance and romantic content that you can put in a book. What Sarah J. Maas started getting accused of is being too smutty. And some of her scenes are unnecessary, but some of them are. And I think if she had a beta reader to condense that, it would be a more, she would have like so much more flow. And she wouldn't have to have these big, huge books because you're taking it and you're smoothing it out. Stephen King, I think, was like the first author that I can think of that got accused of this. Like, why are your horror novels so long? And it's because I think he's a good alpha writer. Like, I think he understands, like, he was an English teacher before he started writing books, but like, so he understands where to put the comma. Like, but he doesn't understand, like, you don't need to like have this scene in this book. Like, this scene is not necessary. Or you're not Nathaniel Hawthorne and you don't need to explain a door in like 20 pages. Like, there's things like that beta cleans up. And it can really bring a story to life because you're not having to go through all of the mud to get to the green grass. Like, you can get to that green grass sooner. And I feel like, as a writer myself, like, I've had the same issue where like everything sounds good. Like, when you're first drafting up something, like, every idea sounds like the most fantastic idea you've ever had. And then you look at it and you're like, no, half of this sucks. Like, or these are good ideas, but they don't fit the story. And that is the problem that we're having with editing, is it's minimal. And I'm like, real people need to get in here and start doing their jobs like they want to. Like, we don't need like 2 or 3 books from an author every year. Like, that is, to me, unless they were self-published and they're just cleaning it up, which I think is the case for a lot of these new Romantasy books. You don't need, like, we can have 1 book a year. Like, there's some authors that if they just brought out a book a year, I would be happy. Like, V. Schwab is a good example. Like, she brings out like maybe 1 or 2 books a year, and the second book that she brought out was like a companion project. So she usually only brings out a book a year. R.F. Kuang, maybe 1 book a year. Sometimes she does take a little bit longer breaks. Brandon Sanderson, like, we're always having something from him. Like is he the new Alexander Hamilton? Like, I have no idea. But you think about it, and it's like, how much editing is being done to, and with some of these authors, like, is there too much editing? Because when I read R.F. Kuang, for example, like, she tried to do a Romantasy and it didn't work because I think she was just she didn't understand Romantasy. Romantasy is supposed to be fun, it's supposed to be joyful. Like, I don't think it's supposed to be like such a heavy message in Romantasy. And I feel like if somebody like looked at Catabasis and was like, oh, this is what you're trying to do, okay, let's do it, you know? And yeah, and we don't need that from Romantasy either. I think Romantasy would be in such better shape if authors just had the time to write and if editors just had the time to edit. And I think if that was the case, this genre would be so much more successful. It would be taken more seriously. Because we all, no matter what genre, what you're reading, we all deserve the best quality from what these authors want to give us. Like, yes, you're gonna get the authors that time and place was just right. They're not the most fantastic writers, but there's something about them that it's attracting a certain audience. And I really don't think there's a bad writer. I just think there is something about, like, there's not really a bad story. There's not badly written characters. Like, it's just, I think what we're getting now out of everything is the factor that we are in an editing crisis. We have so many people that want to be authors, but we don't have enough editors because they're not getting paid. And, you know, people want these Romantasy books, but they don't take them seriously enough, but they make money. So, okay, we're not going to edit them because we know they're going to make money. And that's something that I think we need to think of when we are reviewing this stuff as reviewers, and talking about these important things too. Like, if I'm giving a book a 2 or a 1 star, like, give me some context. Like, why was it that bad? Or if you DNF'd, like, not every book is for everybody, but if you DNF because the writing was bad, well, me as somebody that's about to pick up this book is going to look at that and be like, oh, okay, well, I don't appreciate that. I don't accept that. And that's where I draw the line, is if you have good characters, you have a decent world building, like, that's fine. Not everybody has to do these epic worlds. And I really don't want them to. Sorry, guys. I don't really want them to. Like, I want people to flesh out a world that I'm going to enjoy. But at the same time, like, I'm okay if you just want to, you know, do your thing and clean it up and that's it. Like, if you just want to focus on the characters, focus on the characters. Make a simple world. It's fine. Like, we don't need a complex. We don't need, this is what I think is the problem with this genre, is I think people have the expectations of it has to have a heavy magic system. It has to have epic world building. The characters have to be amazing, like, and like 3 or 4 dimensions and good and evil and everything. Like, I think Romantasy's taking it back to the simple factor of they're fairies, okay, or they're dragons, or they're vampires, you know, and that is good for somebody that is just getting back into reading, or somebody that, like, finds complex magic systems kind of hard to read. And a lot of people just, that's what they like. They like simple. And I think simple is okay. But anyways, I've been blabbering long enough. Like and subscribe. I am trying my hardest to get back on track with this channel. I did just move, but hopefully we'll be back soon with reading, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.